Yep, there's one on your
right
chair.
there. Yep.
Can you sit here? Here's the mic.
That is awesome.
My wife reported was elsewhere, and she's doing a few events as well for the campaign across other parts of Iowa, but I brought Karthik with me today. So.
Hey, it's great to take your children with you. This is faith
been
and family. It's all about family.
We're enjoying it. We're doing it as a family, and it's
well,
good to be here.
Say thank you for coming to Northwest Iowa. I know you've been here many times.
Good to be back.
Exactly. So it's just a privilege that we have you here and that you can make the time to do it. And you know what's interesting to me is you're 38 years old. Decide to run for president. And I see that somewhat as refreshing as we have sort of 80-year-olds toward the top, right? And also we have somebody way at the end of the spectrum. Just tell me and my wife and the rest of us here, what pushed you at that age to say, you know what, it's time for me to run for president?
Yeah, I mean, I know I am young by standards of people who have run for president in the past. I'm the youngest person ever to run as a Republican, that's for sure. I mentioned this on the debate stage the other night when they asked about our favorite president, and mine is Thomas Jefferson. He was 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence.
We've never known that. 33.
33 years old. And he, mentioned this, among other things, he invented the swivel chair while he was at it. He felt like he needed to actually rotate to think, and I get that. But this guy just says, okay, I'm going to invent the swivel chair. And the funny thing is, when it came to the Constitution actually mentions patents. Jefferson was one of the fans of doing it because he was such an inventor. But anyway, I bring that up because there's a reason why these revolutions, these revivals, are often led by the next generation. I think it's going to take somebody whose best days in life are still yet ahead to see a country whose best days are ahead of itself. I do believe that, and I don't take that for granted. Every day we wake up is a blessing, and we don't take tomorrow for granted, but I hope they are for me, and that's the way I look at our country as well. And so, yeah, I come at this not as a politician. I had started, in your kind introduction, you mentioned I had started a biotech company. That was the first major company I started. Probably the thing I'm most proud of still to this day in my career is we developed a life-saving therapy for kids. Small number of kids are born every year with a genetic disease. 100% of them die by the age of 3 if they're untreated. And we worked on a therapy where a majority of those kids now live lives of a normal duration if they're treated. And that's an FDA-approved therapy. So that was my world. There was a series of events I've talked about in my book. After George Floyd died, there were BLM protests. I stood up against corporate America, taking sides in this. But I think that one of the things I did is look myself in the mirror and ask myself, look, I think that God puts each of us here for a reason. My faith teaches me we each have a purpose, and it's a moral duty to realize that purpose. And when I look myself in the mirror after we had our second son last year, had a deep conversation with Apurva, we've lived the American dream, right? My parents, her parents as well, they've come here with no money. We've gone on to found successful companies. Apurva's living her version of the American dream, saving lives every day. I am genuinely worried that that American dream isn't going to exist for our 2 sons and their generation unless we each step up and do our part. And for me, for a lot of reasons we can talk about, I think it's going to take a unique combination for who can lead this country forward. But among those, I think it is going to take somebody with fresh legs and from the next generation to do it. And that's a big part of why I entered this race.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you running. You bring a new perspective.
Yeah, we're, sorry that your wife wasn't able to come today, but we understand, she, like you said, she's busy helping you campaign, and she's trying to balance her work as a throat surgeon. And how have you two been able to manage your campaign, your careers, and your family? And maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about your son and your wife and your other son, too.
Well, I don't think he's spoken at one of these events yet, but do you want to say hi to everybody?
Say hi?
The mic? He's taking a understandable. That's good. Well, one of the things we learned early in this campaign is doing this as a family was the only way, right? I think as a father, my obligation is to my family. I'm not going to be shaken in that. And I think that that's part of what gives me my moral clarity, even in some of my views as it relates to the role of the U.S. president. One of the things is, just as I'm a father, my role is to my family. As your next president, if you all put me there, I think my sole moral duty is to our fellow citizens in this country. I think that in some ways, I mean, this relates to my view as a father, but it relates to my worldview and how I hope to lead this country as the president. You start with your family at home. That's the foundation. We're a citizen of this nation, the United States of America, not any other one. And I think it's our moral duty to look after our family as parents. It's our moral duty to look after this country as leaders, whether in Congress or whether in the White House. And then after that, we can turn to solving hunger in the Congo or wherever else it is that we're sending our foreign aid. And I don't say that disparagingly. Those things are important too. But your moral duty starts closest to home. And that's kind of my worldview, and that's the way I expect to lead this country as well. But anyway, that's one of the things we learned early in this campaign, was that Apurva was put here for a purpose too. She's one of the best in the country at what she does. Many of the people she sees after being cancer survivors, they have not swallowed food for years. And she's one of the few people in this country who does the procedure, does a form of surgery that allows many of those cancer survivors to then eat normal food. And the reason why she's able to do that, she's excellent at what she does, but part of the reason is the healthcare system is so broken that it'll pay for all kinds of pill-pushing behaviors. It'll pay for all kinds of feeding tubes or other expensive interventions, but it happens not to pay often for the one set of procedures that actually allows people to live a better life. And so in her case, she often does that without taking payment. That works, thankfully, for our family because we've lived the American dream, but that doesn't work system-wide. But she's continued to pursue her calling, and she's here on the weekends as we're pursuing it together as a family. But that's one of the things I've learned is if you're each called by your purpose, you know, everything tends to fall into place. And so far, we're grateful for the way it's worked out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So this is the Faith and Family Feenstra event, and we all have different faiths. And I want you to just talk about your faith and your upbringing. Just so we can all understand what that means and what it means to you.
I appreciate that, Randy, and I appreciate it especially because sometimes I feel like that ends up being an elephant in the room at times in events. I'm Hindu, and that's not been a norm for U.S. presidents in the past, and so I acknowledge that. I think it's a good thing for us to be able to have an open dialogue about faith. So I'll tell you about my faith. That is what leads me to pursue this journey, is my faith. My parents instilled in me my faith from a young age, and though I left it probably for much of my 20s and late teen years, I definitely came back to it with conviction. My faith teaches me there's one true God, that He put each of us here for a purpose, that we have a duty to realize that purpose, that God works through us. We are His instruments. He works through us in different ways, but we're still equal. We're all equal because God resides in each of us. That's the core of my Hindu faith. And it happens that I went to Christian schools. So I went to St. Xavier High School in Cincinnati. And one of the things I learned is that actually those values were actually very familiar to the values I was educated in my time at St. X as well. My parents brought us up in a very traditional upbringing. I mean, they always taught us family's the foundation. Marriage is sacred. There's very traditional upbringing, between a man and a woman. That divorce is not some option you just prefer. That the good things in life involve a sacrifice. Abstinence before marriage is the way to go. That it's not just about this life. It's about an eternal life long after this life just here on earth. And so when I got to St. X and we read in scriptures class in 9th grade, we read the 10 Commandments for the first time. What do they say? One true God. Don't take His name in vain. Respect the Sabbath. Honor your parents. That was a big one for me. Don't lie. Don't cheat. Don't steal. Don't commit adultery. Don't covet. It didn't feel like I was reading those 10 Commandments for the first time. And that's certainly when it hit me that these values that I was raised in, they don't belong to Hindus. Just as they don't belong to Christians or Jews or anybody else, they belong to God. And I do believe those are the values this nation was founded on. But that's what we have to remember, is that it's not just about the laws we see on a piece of paper. This Constitution and everything else was made for a moral people. And one of the core teachings of my faith, I alluded to it before, is that we don't get to choose who God works through. God chooses who God works through. So later that semester at St. X, we get to the book of Isaiah. You may be familiar with some of the teachings coming out of that, but God chose Cyrus in that book, a Gentile all the way in Persia, to lead the Jews back to the promised land. And so that's a core teaching of my faith, is that I believe that we each have our own God-given gifts. It's our duty to use those gifts to achieve good on this earth, and that's a big part of what led me to this journey as well. And we can talk about what I think needs to be done in this country, but I would say it is my faith that led me to this journey, and we're very proud of that.
Well, thanks for explaining that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to ask you a question from a student here at Dort. We have a question from Nicodemus Elliott, who is a nursing major. Can you raise your hand, Nicodemus? His question is this: as a Christian, I have an obligation to vote for candidates who are dedicated to rewarding what is good and punishing what is evil, as shown in Romans 13, verses 1 through 7. To do this well, you must have a strong subjection to God and the Bible as a moral compass. Since Christians are those who dedicate their lives to following Jesus as the exclusive means of salvation and restoration, what confidence can you leave us with that your campaign will work with the Christian vision to advance the kingdom of God in America?
It's a great question. And I don't know if the individual's here or not, but I'm grateful. This is an open conversation I think we need to be having. So we share the same value set in common. It's a different faith, but the values this country was founded on, those Judeo-Christian values enshrined in our Constitution, those are the values, not only was I raised in, those are the values we live our life by. And I think it has been a long time. Let's have some, it's a real talk question, and I love that. Let's have some real talk. I think it has been a long time since we have had a president who certainly I could look my two sons in the eye, and probably most Christian parents could look their kids in the eye and tell them in good conscience that I want you to grow up and be like him. That is the standard I want you to hold me to, because half of the job of the next president is reviving our national character. Half the job is policy, and we often go into depth on that, and we can. But half the job is reviving our national character. And so if you want a president, to the gentleman who asked the question, who's going to spread Christianity across this country, I wouldn't be the right candidate for that, for many reasons. But among them, I think, is that I don't think that's the job of the U.S. president. I'm not running for pastor. I wouldn't be qualified to be pastor, but I am running to be commander-in-chief and to be president. And that president swears an oath to the Constitution and needs to be grounded in the same values that that Constitution was written to protect. And that I can say that, will I stand for those values? You're darn right I will. And I think even more so, I think I am uniquely positioned to do it because we are in a religiously diverse country. And we should want people of every faith to still stand for those same values of family as the foundation, believing that God doesn't need to be a four-letter word in our culture, believing in yourself, believing that we are put here for a purpose, believing in the foundational values of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. I think we want a president who's able to stand for that and reach more than just Christians or people of any one faith with those values in the United States. And so what I will say is that partly because I am young, partly because there are some things that are different about me than other candidates, an outsider, a person of Hindu faith, it is my special responsibility to make faith and family and hard work and patriotism cool again, actually, for the next generation. I think they're pretty cool. And I think that it's our job as leaders to do that. And I'm in this race in part because I think I can do that better than anybody else from traditional politics, better than anybody else in this race. And with that comes a special responsibility to actually do it. And so that's what I would say is I see a difference, and I think it's good for our country when we see a difference between the role of president and pastor, because there's a role for both in our national revival. And I think that the role of a president right now is to revive our national identity. I think we're missing our national identity as Americans. We have a shared national identity in this country. And then protect religious freedom in a way that we have not done well in the last 20 years, so that parents and pastors and teachers can step up and play their role as well. We're all going to have to play our part, and I'm going to play mine. So that's what I would say in response to that great question.
Thank you for that response.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I look at your son, and your son's going, Dad, are we done now? Are we done now?
I'm proud of him so far, but we'll see.
He's great. He's great. So I want to ask you something. I have four children, and you have 2 children. You know, the thing that really worries me, and I sit on Ways and Means, so I think about it every day, is our $34 trillion of debt that's on the backs of our children. Yep. I want to look at a president saying, what are we going to do? We got to solve this. I mean, we really got to. So what is your plan? And we're running slow on time, so just think through this.
And I'm sick of the lip service to this. I really am, because it's become a talking point. It's so trite. Yet we're not working with a lot of time, right? So I want to impart what I see as a deep sense of urgency here. If our interest payments on our national debt become the largest line item in our federal budget, we're done, because then we're in quicksand. We're about 5 years from that happening. That's where we are right now. So let's get serious and understand what that debt looks like. Everybody in this room has about $100,000 in debt on their shoulders that they didn't know they had. That's the national debt. But that's not quite it, Randy, even, because it's really the next generation that's going to bear it. I'm very happy to see people of the next generation here today as well on a Saturday morning. I'm pleased. But here's the news that they need to know. It's about $200,000 of debt on their shoulders that they didn't know they had. $7 trillion of that is due to 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that did not advance the American interest. I'm prepared to lay a stake in the ground and say that didn't advance America's interest when the Taliban is still in charge 20 years later, and when Iraq is still a broken country, vulnerable to Iranian incursion. I am worried that we're on the cusp of repeating some of those same mistakes again. I've said so unapologetically in places like Ukraine or elsewhere. So let's just learn those lessons of the past. Now let's get serious about buying down that debt. Pull the oil and natural gas, the gifts that God has blessed this country with. We could sell that into the market and buy down a good portion of our national debt. Minus the $7 trillion, buying down our national debt, now we're south of $20 trillion. This becomes a little bit more manageable relative to the interest payments on that debt as well. And then let's get serious, and I think now we need a CEO in the White House, a serious CEO. And I'll tell you how I've run my businesses. I've built multiple businesses from scratch, a multi-billion-dollar company. I led as CEO. I start with zero-based budgeting. I think we start with last year's budget as the baseline and then roll it forward. But last year's budget was based on the prior year's budget. The prior year's budget was based on the one before that, each of which was broken, and even in many cases, if we're being honest, captured by special interests. So what I want to do is bring zero-based budgeting, start with zero as the baseline, and then really build up and ask what's actually necessary. And if we're doing that, one of the things we'll realize is we need a 75% reduction in the number of federal bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. I mean, the dirty little secret today, the people who we elect to run the government are really, thank you, should be the ones who are actually running the government.
Yes.
But today, and this is with full respect to people who are in your seat, they're not the ones who are actually pulling the levers of power today. It's the people who were never elected to those positions in that federal bureaucracy. And so one of the things I've said, this sounds like crazy talk for a second, but then I'm going to tell you why it's crazy is actually the status quo. We need mass layoffs, 75% of those people gone by the end of my first term. We're going to do 50% in the first month, and it's got to look something like this. If your social security number ends in an odd number and you're in the federal bureaucracy, you're out. And if it ends in an even number, you're in. Now, I can promise you if we do that on day 2, not a thing is going to break. Sun will still rise in the east and set in the west. And our federal bureaucracy will be half its size. But it has to be done that way, because this is what stops presidents. They say that otherwise you're going to get sued. This is what they told Trump. This is what they've told Reagan. You're going to get sued for political retaliation or for civil rights violations. Well, for mass firings, the civil service rules don't apply. And so president, and this goes back to even the first question about faith and purpose and why we're doing this. I think it takes a president now who on one hand is going to come from the outside with sharp elbows, willing to break some glass and get that done. And Trump brought that, and I bring some of that. But it will also take a president who has a deep understanding of the law and the Constitution of this country. And as somebody who's hired thousands of people in the businesses I've built, and the career I've built, is those two skills don't usually go together, right? Usually you'll have the academic law professor type over here, but they're not going to be able to execute and get it done. You might have the sharp elbow business guy, but might get duped if you don't understand the actual law and the Constitution. And that comes back to that sense of purpose I talked about. I think God put each of us here for a purpose, and it's our duty to realize that purpose. And that's really what led me to this journey. If there's one thing I get done, we will shut down that shadow government in the deep state by the end of my first term. And that much I'm confident we can do.
So we got just a couple minutes left.
Okay. As president, you would face many challenges. We see a barbaric war perpetuated by Russia, tourist attacks in Israel, China on the rise, an open border, crime rising here at home. History teaches us about the rise and falls of nations, as well as the rise and fall of rulers. If you were president of the United States, how would you help our nation maintain a firm foundation of economic security and moral stability?
So I think we could spend a whole day, and that's not what today's about, on economic policy, foreign policy, and I've laid that out elsewhere. But I want to go a layer deeper here. There's something that's upstream of both of those challenges. We are in the middle of a national identity crisis right now. If you ask people my age, the age of many people who are in the front row here, what does it mean to be an American today? You get a blank stare in response. It's like a deer in the headlights. That is the vacuum. That is the void in this country. Right? At the same time in our history, the things that used to fill that void, faith, patriotism, hard work, family. These things have disappeared, only to be replaced by, and then you could fill in the blank, right? Wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, depression, anxiety, fentanyl, opioids, suicide, whatever it is. These are symptoms of a deeper void of purpose and meaning in our country. And I think that, so I'm an America First conservative, right? I'm proud of that. I don't apologize for that. But to put America first, we now live in a moment where we have to rediscover what America is. Right? What does it mean to be an American? What are the ideals that set this country into motion in 1776? I brought up Thomas Jefferson before. I think we live in a 1776 moment right now. And once we answer who we are, what are those values? Meritocracy, the pursuit of excellence. That means you get ahead in this country, not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character. We unlock this economy and says, you know what, we'll drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear, put the best people in the job rather than somebody based on their race or their gender. We'll actually stop paying people more money to stay at home instead of to go to work. Great, there's our economic solutions right there. We'll say that we will stand strong and protect our own homeland, that a nation without borders is not a nation, because who we are is we're founded on the rule of law. That's what I'll use to put the military on the southern border and the northern border. So in some ways, for me, these aren't slogans, and I think most of us in this Republican Party, thankfully, agree on a lot of those sensible domestic policies. But I think we live in a moment where we have to connect that to the why. It's not just because we're solving, we have this economic challenge, let's solve that, and then play whack-a-mole with our border crisis over here. We're not going to get to the root cause unless we realize what's really going on is we have lost our sense of who we are as Americans. I mean, our generation, we have been taught to celebrate our diversity and our differences so much that we forgot all of the ways we are really just the same as Americans. I mean, I brought a different shade of melanin today, okay, great. So what? If there's nothing greater that unites us across that diversity, that's the job of the next president, is to answer what are those shared ideals that unite us, the ideals enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And then our economic policies and our foreign policies follow from that. But once we fill that void, that's how we actually drive change in this country. And I do think that's going to take someone from the outside, from the next generation, to lead us actually to something, to our vision. And that's why I'm in this race. And so thank you for the good conversation today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming today. I so much appreciate you bringing your son today. I mean, it's special. So I look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail. We have 5 weeks left. And
I'll just say one thing in closing, because we had a lot of dour topics, and I heard the great discussion you had with Ryan before as well.
About 30 seconds.
Sure. The one thing I want people to take away is we don't have to be that nation in decline. I think as a nation, we are really still just a little young, actually. And I think we can still be a nation in our ascent. So on one hand, I'm not going to be the person who tells you it's morning in America, because it's not. But I think it can be. And I think it's going to take a leader who both sees the present hour for what it is. The hour is late, but it's not done yet. And I think with that, I do think that our nation's best days for the next generation can still be ahead of us. And I want to thank you guys for doing what you do every day.
Thank you for coming from Northwest
Thank
Iowa.
you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, my friend.